I'm Josiah Hunter. I'm with Lindsey Business Group. I'm going to kind of be the moderator, introduce our three panel speakers. The way it's going to work today is each one will take about 10 minutes, do a little presentation, and then afterward we'll open up for questions so you can actually get your questions answered. Some housekeeping real quick. If restrooms, go out the back door here, immediately to the right, and kind of swirl around, you'll see another right down a hallway, and I think right straight down that hallway is the restroom. Cell phones, please silence them. We understand you all work, so if you've got an emergency, feel free to kind of step out back and take your emergency call if you need it. So today we've got DeOrnellas with us. Tom is with Lindsey Business Group. I'm not good at memorizing things, so I'm going to read, if you don't mind. Tom has over 25 years of insurance experience in underwriting and risk management, with a focus on assisting government contractors, associations, and nonprofits, and professional services and construction industries. Actually, Tom was an underwriter at one point, but he is a chartered property casualty underwriter. He was formerly an insurance advisor to the American Institute of Architects Contract Documents Committee, and he's been an industry speaker for national and state chapter associations on commercial insurance and industry risk management issues. He's provided cyber security presentations and risk management to George Mason Enterprise Center and other DMV organizations. Tom's a native here to Northern Virginia, and he attended and earned his bachelor's in business administration from College of William & Mary. Harvey's down the other end here. Harvey is with PBMares. He's a CPA and a CISA. He's a partner at PBMares. He's responsible for the cyber and control risk services. Harvey uses his experience to provide IT and cyber consulting and assurance services to commercial businesses, specializing in risk management, data privacy, incident response, disaster recovery, business continuity, and more. Harvey regularly attends continuing professional education in cybersecurity, SOC auditing and reporting, network and internet security, and information technology risk management in order to kind of remain relevant and certified in this kind of fast-changing environment that we have in the cyber world. Harvey graduated from Old Dominion University with a Master's of Science in Accounting, and the University of North Carolina with a Bachelor's of Science in Business Management. Finally, we've got David Rossell with Ntiva. David is a PhD with the CISP and is the Managing Director of Security and Consulting Services at Ntiva. David has been in the IT industry for the past 20 years. He's played every role from help desk to CIO and understands the challenges and constraints facing the organization of every type and size. As a practice principal, David helps Ntiva's clients manage their IT infrastructure, secure their networks, evaluate their risk, and meet compliance requirements. David graduated with his Bachelor of Science in Journalism from Northwestern University. He has an MA in American History and the History of Technology from the University of Delaware, and he earned his PhD in American History from the SUNY of Buffalo. So those are your panelists today. We're going to start off, I believe, with PBMares, and then Ntiva, and then we'll hear from Tom.
Thank you, Josiah, and good morning, everyone. Welcome again. We really appreciate you joining us today. We really chose this format so you can kind of ask the experts all of your burning questions about cybersecurity. Cyber is one of the fastest growing and one of the more prevalent risks that businesses face today. And really part of why it's so intimidating is because it's out of most of our business leaders' wheelhouse. Depending on whatever your business is, most of you probably don't have an IT background. So we know there's this emerging risk of cybersecurity. So how do we get our arms around it? How much money do we spend on our protection? It's a really important question that needs to be answered. And cyber is a very, very broad area. There are thousands of different attack vectors, new vulnerabilities being discovered every day. And so we're going to try to simplify that to the extent possible and really focus on 3 core pillars of cybersecurity. And each one of us will have a little bit of a different topic, but we will talk about each one of these areas. I'm going to talk a little bit about risk management. David will do as well. That is just the consulting and advisory aspect of cybersecurity. What are the policies and procedures we need to develop? What type of testing do we need to perform on our environment? What are some of those securities and best practice controls that we can implement to help protect our organization? We're also going to talk a little bit about the infrastructure. IT is built off of infrastructure, so that's a really, really important topic, and it's where most attacks originate. And we're also going to talk about a different layer of risk management, but we're going to talk about cyber insurance. One of the biggest reasons that companies go out of business is because they don't have adequate insurance. There's a lot of different aspects to it, and it's very important to make sure you've got a very robust policy that is comprehensive to the nature and complexity of your organization. We are really in a state of global cyber warfare today. It is not just something that the 15-year-olds are doing in the bottom of their basements anymore. This is really a large-scale big business operation. You have entire organizations that are profiting from this. You have nation states that have entire units and armies dedicated to cyber hacking. So I think it will top some $6 trillion in revenue next year, and so this is one of the largest growing sectors in the world today. And why? It's because data really is the new oil. It is the most valuable commodity a business has and possesses today. And so it's very, very important to understand what type of data you have and really where it lives in your organization. You have hackers who are after your personal data. They want to steal it and either use it to conduct fraud or sell it on the black market. You have businesses and nation states, such as the Chinese, who are actively and have entire groups that are hacking businesses and organizations to steal our intellectual property and confidential project data, our designs, so that they can gain a competitive advantage in the growing global economy. You have nation states such as the Russians who are hacking our elections in order to compromise our democracy. It is an attack on all angles and all sides, and it's not going away anytime soon. I want to talk to you a little bit today about just one of the more prominent threats that a lot of folks don't realize. Businesses today, over 75% outsource a critical function of their service or product offering. You are relying on a third party in some fashion, whether it's your IT support, whether you host your network or have an outside consultant who helps you with your IT infrastructure. Your key financial accounting system is likely a third-party software that was developed by someone else. Your key project management systems, your payroll. These are just a few examples of the many types of different outsourcing that occurs. So again, where is your data? Who owns it? Where does it live? Is your third-party system or application in the cloud? Outside of your environment? Creates a whole, while it has a lot of benefits and it's wonderful, it creates a whole new layer of concern and risk about where is that data and where is it live. So the question is, can you rate your third-party vendor risk? And how do you rate that risk? Who are your key third parties and how are you tracking and identifying them? If I'm entrusting ADP with my payroll, just as an example, how do I know that their program is secure? What kind of assurances do I have that they're protecting our data and my data, the data that's so valuable to me, my employees' data? How do we know that our financial accounting system is secure? What controls does that organization have in place? So one of the growing areas, and I'm sure many of you know, well, what's a CPA doing up here talking about cybersecurity? So actually one of the growing areas, and it's becoming the gold standard in the United States today for third-party assurances, is called a SOC audit. It's a service organization control audit. This is something that your vendor would obtain and hire a firm like PBMares to come in and do a review of that system, to assess the security, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of that system, so that they can do it one time and they can provide that report to all of their customers, and it gives you assurances that that system has been certified, it's been tested by an independent third party, because you have concerns about that. You want to know where your data is. You want to know that it's protected. How many of us have an actual vendor risk rating system where we have identified our vendors, which ones are critical, and track them for importance, following up? You don't need to follow up and get a SOC audit on all of your vendors, but which ones are our critical ones? Which ones are the key and important ones today? So how does PBMares go about providing our risk management services? A lot of what we do is in the policy sector, helping organizations either establish or update their cyber and IT policy and controls. We do a lot of program development in the disaster recovery, vendor management, as I just mentioned. Helping organizations set up a system to risk rate and track their vendors is something we do a lot of today. Do risk assessments and our compliance audits. All types of audits, both you might want to conduct internally to say, well, we've set up this program now, how do we know it's working? So we do a lot of attestation and IT audits to test the controls of those systems. And again, we offer these third-party SOC reports. CPAs are the only firms in the country that are allowed to do those based off of the standards of the profession. So we perform all types of SOC audits, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, and now there's a SOC 4, cybersecurity. So which one is right for you really depends on the nature of the vendor and the organization. And you, as a business, may wish to get the SOC for cybersecurity for yourself. If you provide services to your customers, this is a control report that you can please helps prove to them that your system is secure in place. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave.
Right. Thanks, Harvey. Normally I'm a pacer when I talk, but I think if I stay still, everybody in the room can see me, so I'm going to keep my butt in my chair and resist the impulse to move around a lot. I'm Dave Rossell. I run the security and consulting practice here at Ntiva. And today I'm going to talk about three broad categories of things. First is I want to introduce you to what the big active threats are out there right now in terms of cybersecurity risk. Talk a little bit about the baseline security measures that you can implement to help dramatically reduce that risk. And when I say baseline security measures, I mean these items are sort of the evolving notion of what due diligence is. And then finally, I'll talk about what some of the next steps are if you're an organization that has clients that are very averse to risk. If your own clients are, if you're averse to risk in your organization, if you have regulatory compliance requirements, then you may need to look to some of these next steps. So to start, So, starting off with the active threats, and nowadays it's not just a question of whether it can happen to you or not. You know, we're sort of genetically hardwired to think that the bad things usually only happen to other people. All the psychology research, the social psych research says that. But with cybersecurity, it's important to keep in mind that even for small and mid-sized businesses, the threat is very real to you, and odds are you are going to suffer some sort of cybersecurity event within the next 12 months. If you're lucky, it's small, like maybe a compromised password for a receptionist. If you're not lucky, it's a full-blown ransomware attack, or it's an executive's credentials are compromised and you lose data. One of the big things that we're seeing right now, of course, is ransomware. 2019 is going to be known as the year of ransomware. I had a bunch of statistics pulled from earlier this year. I'm not even going to mention those because it's just this past week, San Bernardino School District had a bunch of schools got hit. The city of Johannesburg in South Africa just had a major ransomware event. City of Baltimore, even Ntiva, we've seen, as of today, about 16 of our clients that I know of have had ransomware attacks that we've had to help them recover from. And these aren't organizations that have slipshod security. These are places that, generally speaking, have their act together. They have a really good managed IT service provider in Ntiva, but bad things still happen to these organizations. You have to be ready for it, and you have to do everything that you can to mitigate that risk. Ransomware is one of the big things. Stolen credentials are another really important thing, as more and more organizations are going to the cloud for email, whether it's Office 365 or whether it's G Suite for Business. That makes your data more accessible to attackers. And what we're seeing is really every couple of weeks or less, one of our clients is having somebody have their credentials compromised. So, and we're going in, we're helping them change passwords. I'll talk about some of the best ways to prevent this from being a real problem for you and some of the ways it happens, but it's out there and it's an issue, even for small businesses. So let's talk about some baseline security measures. And I'll go through this whole list fairly briefly. So first, let's talk about backups. A backup is not going to keep something bad from happening, but it's going to take a bad day and keep it from becoming a terrible day. It's critical for ransomware protection. So oftentimes when ransomware strikes, the only way that we can recover systems, short of paying the criminals the ransom, is to recover from backup. And we've had a number of clients where we've done this for them. The process goes fairly smoothly, and you're back in business, and it doesn't cost an arm and a leg in Bitcoin to do it. But backup is absolutely critical to your organization. It's also really important to make sure that your backups are stored off-site, that is up in the cloud. If your backups are local, a lot of this new ransomware is getting very adept at seeking out your backup appliances and encrypting those also, or destroying those also. So you have to have some sort of cloud-based backup to be able to really protect your organization. Baseline antivirus. Antivirus is getting less and less effective. So if you have Symantec or Bitdefender or WebRoot or whatever, these products are all really good, but they're not capable of stopping the most advanced ransomware attacks. And they're not capable of stopping a hacker from worming his or her way into your system and then traversing laterally within your system. It's part of due diligence having antivirus, but you can't assume that antivirus is really going to protect your network or your data. What will protect your data is multi-factor authentication. And I can't say this enough. If you don't have multi-factor authentication protecting anything that's accessible from the internet, you're negligent. You need to get multi-factor authentication. I know I'm phrasing this pretty strongly, but you just need to do it. When we say multi-factor authentication, let me take just one quick step back. There are three ways, broad ways, to prove that you are who you say you are. One thing is something that you know, like a password. Another thing is something that you have, and that something that you have can be a smart card, it can be a cell phone, it can be one of those little fobs, like those old RSA tokens that used to display numbers. The third way is something that you are, like a fingerprint, a face scan, a palm print, an iris scan. Multi-factor authentication requires that you present two of those three credential options to prove that you are who you say you are. So, for example, at a gas station, your credit card is a physical factor and your zip code is something that you know. Or you may need to do some sort of biometric thing where you put your fingerprint on something. You would think that biometric would be sort of this be-all, end-all, but even that can be spoofed, and you want to make sure that you have another factor in there. Now, this is critical nowadays because you have so many sophisticated phishing attacks harvesting users' credentials that it's very easy for an attacker to gain access to your systems remotely. Credentials are available for sale on the internet. Oftentimes people use the same passwords for, say, Amazon that they use for their corporate accounts, and attackers know this, and so they'll buy a couple $100,000 Zappos credentials, and then they'll start using those credentials on employer infrastructure, trying to get in that way. And it's very effective. It's called credential stuffing. There's also the classic password guessing attacks. So there's lots of really good multi-factor products out there. Office 365 and G Suite have ones that are built in for free. And if all you're using is, say, Google or O365, you can just use the free versions of these products. If, however, you're protecting more than just one thing with multi-factor authentication, and most of us are, a lot of times it helps to use a product like Duo, where you're paying just a few bucks a month per user, and that allows you to protect under one platform your email, your VPN, your remote desktop server, Salesforce, etc., so that your people don't have to juggle a bunch of different things. All right, security policies. You would think that as a technician, I don't really worry about policy a lot. I spend a lot of time actually working with organizations on IT security policy. These policies help set basic user behavior so that everybody knows what they're supposed to do, which is super important. It helps you understand with the data management policy where your data lives and how you treat it. You can't protect what you don't know you have, and you don't want to be surprised in the event of a data breach by what's in some folder that somebody took. You want to know what was in that folder in advance. And then finally, a good data destruction policy, because you want to be sure that you're deleting this information promptly. So part of good policies involves planning for the worst. So having a good business continuity plan, having a good disaster recovery plan, having a really good security incident response plan. And if you work with an auditing firm, they're going to expect you to have all of these things as part of a SOC audit. Your major clients are going to expect you to have all of these things. And they're good not just for checking a box, but also really for giving you a solid handle on, hey, who is responsible for doing X or Y when a major incident hits? And you want to try to keep people from running around like chickens, trying to figure out what to do. These policies, especially if you practice them on an annual basis, will really help you with that. And then finally, for baseline security, phishing prevention training. Something like 90% of all cyber attacks are somehow rooted in phishing. That is either fake credentials or fake emails that load ransomware or other malware on your computers. So you want to make sure that your employees are well educated in how to recognize phishing messages when they appear. And the only way to do that really is to have regular testing. I recommend monthly, where you're providing simulated phishes to people, and they are having to try to recognize them, get better to recognize them, and then receive training if they don't recognize them very well. And when you're looking at phishing simulators, look for ones that are going to simulate a broad range of types of phishing messages. So attachments, click-throughs, entering in credentials, so that your users get broad experience with what's out there. So finally, I'm just going to touch on these, and if you have more questions on these later, we can talk about them in more detail. Again, these great next steps are really for organizations that have regulatory requirements or are especially security conscious. Advanced endpoint protection is software that lives on your computer that protects against more advanced cyber attacks. Intrusion detection and response is inspecting all the traffic and all the logs available on your network and looking for signs of compromise. And then finally, vulnerability scanning is something that you employ that helps you detect the kinds of things that attackers exploit so that you can close off those gaps before the attackers do. And this is me with the overly large picture, my contact information up there. Please feel free to reach out. We love talking about this stuff, and we'd love to help you. All right, Tom, it's all you.
All right, good morning, everybody, again. I'm a pacer, so I'm actually going to pace. Very good. All right, so let's start with the idea that this is, cybersecurity is a different animal. It's just a different type of risk. Why is it different? Well, David alluded to this. The basic thing is it's contrary to human nature. Everybody says it's not going to happen to us. We don't need a plan for it. I'm aware of it. I read about hacks. It's out there, but it's not really something we need to worry about. Okay, that's the first thing. So it's hard and difficult to any risk assessment. Okay, you got to ID the risk. You have to assess the risk, right? And then decide whether you're going to manage it or you're going to transfer it. Well, can anybody tell me what the average cyber claim is, what the costs might be in 2 years, what your exposure is, all the way up and down your network, what your vendors, who your vendors are connected to, who your subcontractors are connected to. Okay. It's tough. It's tough to get your arms around. In a classic business decision, you know your locations, you know how many people you have, you know your contracts. You can make a reasonable judgment, okay, based on this number of locations, this number of payroll, this is what I need to invest as far as insurance, okay? Well, these are risk things that I can do. I could work with my attorney, okay, on contracts. And those are all good starting points, but again, it's very, very difficult to predict and identify what the true cost of a cyber breach is going to be. Okay? Both before it happens, while it's happening, and the impact to you later on, okay? So, I'm a former undertaker / underwriter. I guess a little bit of a joke, but it's sort of in the morning, so okay, I get that. But as an underwriter, I always go towards what is the basic thing that I want to tell people that they need to do? What is this standard that you need to meet? You don't need to go past it, but you need to at least strive to get to that point. And that's what's called the standard of care. And that same concept that applies to standard of care, which is what would the reasonable, prudent person with the same information as you, with the same resources that you have, what would they do? What would they invest? Okay? What proactive measures would they take? So again, you don't need to exceed that, but that's the target. Well, typically with the standard of care, you say, well, okay, let's take a medical practice. Okay, medical practice has been around for a long period of time. Medical industry has been around for a long period of time. Medical insurance has been in place for a while. There's case law there. We know what the risks are to doctors. Okay, we know the documentation that doctors need to take as far as records. We know the hiring and training they need to do for their people. Okay, we know the insurance roughly, unless there's some sort of something unusual with new illnesses. You have a rough idea of if I want to insure for my maximum risk, you can sort of paint that rough picture. With cyber, again, it's tough to get your arms around what the target is. Okay, if it's the standard of care, what would a reasonable and prudent person do? Classic question: if I asked everybody in the room, how much cyber insurance do you need? And why? We get a lot of good discussion. We may not have consensus, right? Okay, but a good discussion. But that is the thing that you're shooting for. Again, still, just like with anything else, any other liability that you're managing for your business, it's the idea is you're shooting to meet the standard of care, not exceed it, but what's there. So, I want to flashback. Phil and I were talking about this ahead of time. 1999. Why did I go to 1999? Well, 1999 there was something at the end of the year that everybody's kind of worried about, right? Okay, Y2K. It was going to be the end of the world as we knew it, right? A little musical reference there, pardon that. But okay, so, well, fortunately, it didn't turn out to be, but that was a classic case of an external threat that people felt very sure could happen, might happen, and they honestly didn't know what to do. They didn't know how big this was going to be, how much would it tie my business, how long would it tie my business, right? Okay. That was the discussion. But what was not part of the discussion in 1999? Cyber insurance. Why was the cyber insurance in the discussion? Well, cyber insurance really wasn't available. It wasn't really in play. One of the larger insurance companies, AIG, just launched their first cyber policy in that year, coincidentally. Okay. So again, clear threat. Everybody was worried about, got everybody's attention. hard to identify, hard to quantify. What was the risk management solution? Okay. Standard of care in 1999 was not to carry a cyber insurance policy. Flash forward to today. Okay. Who hasn't seen an ad for cyber insurance if you're in this field at all? Okay. Who hasn't, there's a million brokers out there, there's lots of solutions, it can be $250 or it can be $50,000. Okay, it's the whole thing. How do you sort it out? But again, the standard of care now is if you get sued and you're liable to other people, there's costs that you're going to incur, there's a disruption to your business, and the standard of care, if you can't meet those requirements, is going to be to carry a cyber insurance policy or some sort of cyber insurance coverage. Okay. Case law is still developing on this one. Okay, and it's not to the point yet. But I was reading up on Harvey. I was reading up on very exciting the state guidelines for data breach reporting and the penalties associated with it. Okay, so once you start to get the regulation kicking in a little bit, and the regulators in the states that are out there, if they're identifying as a target, that starts to establish the case law, the liability that you have to. We don't carry cyber insurance. We don't notify people on a prompt basis, and there's issues that we suffer. So again, standard of care is what we're looking for, but it's elusive with cybersecurity. What are the general trends? Well, small to mid-sized businesses are targets. There's an kind of inherent lower level prevention and breach response. It's easy to get in and out with a ransomware sort of situation. Okay. Hackers are going to focus more on cloud providers. We hear fairly frequently from our clients, well, I may not have cyber insurance, but I'm on the cloud, so I'm covered, right? Okay. Your cloud provider is a great source of data management and helps you do business, but your cloud provider is not an insurance policy. Everything's mobile now. As we have the mobile movements, that creates malware situations. It's just inherent. That's the nature of the beast. Is the situation getting easier? No, it's getting tougher. Well, convenience. We want more convenience. The Internet of Things is going to quadruple the number of gadgets that we've got to make our lives easier, to make our businesses run more effectively and efficiently. But that's going to increase the risk. Cyber claim examples. You can't take the human error, human component out of this piece. Okay. And these are roughly in order of, there was a report that looked at roughly in order of the causes of types of cyber claims. But again, human error, just basically, an example could be an employee distributing email improperly. Okay. David spent a fair amount of time talking about the idea of phishing in emails. Okay. One of the things that at this point is also kind of becoming the standard of care is some sort of training program for your employees in terms of emails. What to open, what not to open, sort of basic awareness with employees is just a given. Unauthorized access through hacking, literal physical theft, theft of digital assets, laptops, any other electronic instruments. Privacy breach, disposal of client records. That's also something that you're going to have to think about in terms of your policy for cyber risk management. Okay. Here's the kicker. 60% of small businesses, because of the effect of a cyber breach, are out of business within 6 months of suffering an attack. It's a staggering number. What are the costs of a breach? Okay, there's both some tangible costs as well as intangible costs. There's disruption of your operations. There's a double effect. There's a loss of sales. There's also the effect of incurring costs, remediating costs, being one example. You've got to notify customers, maybe need to provide credit monitoring. After a system breach, you're going to have to hire security experts or IT consultants to figure out what happened to your system and to fix it going forward. And of course, there's potential for lawsuits from customers that are seeking damages, both private customers as well as those obligations that you have to states in terms of reporting. What are the elements, really quickly? Data breach response elements. There's, and again, I want you to think of these in terms of if you have a cyber insurance policy versus if you don't. So again, there's a forensics piece, the investigation part of it. I'm just going to go down the left side. The forensics to figure out exactly what happened. You may have legal assistance that are needed to determine what the laws are that may have been violated or not. Reporting obligations could be just individual clients, could be state, and maybe some federal reporting requirements depending on your contracts. Notifications to victims, physical mailings, emails, call centers. Public relations. what is the effect on a small business or even a mid-sized business when there's notice that they've been breached? Target, big company, they could absorb that hit. I don't know how many people effectively stopped shopping at Target because of the breach. They're aware of it, but again, it was one thing that they could easily absorb. Not the case with a small mid-sized business. You just don't have those funds. Credit monitoring a requirement, and you may have regulatory concerns too as well. All right, so transferring the risk. All right, so you've risk management. You idea it, you assess the risk, make a stab at that, you conclude that you want to transfer the risk. Okay, the only true way is to secure a cyber insurance policy. Let me go one step further. To secure a true cyber standalone policy. If you get riders on existing policies, that's something, but that really is not enough protection for you. So a true cyber standalone policy that is reviewed with your broker, with your attorney. That's really the solution that you're looking for there. Okay. The policy is written with two pieces. One is outbound. Okay. So liability coverage that you have in a cyber policy. The first piece is not to your system. The first piece is to protect your liable to other people based on breach notices. Okay. There's also regulatory defense coverage. So situations where you might have, because of data breach, as I said, states are increasingly starting to assess fines and penalties and have requirements if you don't notify them on a timely basis of certain categories of breaches too as well. Okay. So you want to think about not only notifying the obligation to notify clients, but there could be state regulations too as well. And I have information specifically on the latest for all the individual state guidelines for those areas.
Excuse me, can you give like one or two examples of what you're talking about there, where the state would find for not?
So if you are a certain size company or a certain type of size breach, okay, you are required to notify the state within a certain amount of time that you're, for instance, if you have more than 1,000 employees, okay, you are obligated to notify within, within a certain amount of time, say 30 or 60 days, notify the state. But even if you got it under control, notify the state to say, this is the situation, this is what's happened, this is the breach of my system.
So Virginia, DC, Maryland, all the same?
It varies. Literally, I think we were talking about beforehand. It really doesn't. Insurance tends to track the nature of the state, if you will. Okay, Maryland is a little more consumer, customer friendly. Virginia is a little more business friendly, if you will. So there's different levels, and literally the standard they assess is some states are more strict. That's literally the word that they use, more strict in their assessments of their penalties or requirements. Either it's less number of employees or a shorter period of time, or different more situations where you need to notify them, or other situations where it's a little more general. Okay.
What type of breach are you talking about?
So,
Some of phishing shields.
real quick, just
Yeah.
for the sake of time.
Yeah.
Um,
Let me-
No, it's okay. Once you ask questions, we're going to give some time to ask questions after they finish their presentations. We've got a couple of questions also that we know are kind of regularly asked that we'd like to kick off. But then if you want to get really in-depth, I know that Tom, David, and Harvey will be around afterward. We'll get a one-on-one conversation with you and maybe really get into your situation.
Okay, a good question. So, okay. Now, so that's the liability part of the policy that the cyber has. Now, the first side, of course, is the first party is your own system. So restoration expenses, notification expenses, managing the crisis, those are all, again, situations that are covered on a true cyber policy. A true separate standalone cyber policy is going to cover both your liability as well as your own system. The last pieces are all internal, okay? Computer fraud, transfer fraud, e-commerce extortion, okay? Essentially, a cyber policy is a crime policy. Well, in the past, if you ask an underwriter, a crime policy is just me. I either buy it or I don't. I either insure my situation or I don't. Crime was sort of internal. Here's a crime policy that you need to purchase that essentially is coming from an outside threat. It's a little bit different. All right. Business interruption, additional expenses. One of the questions that we get fairly frequently is, okay, what happens with the vendor? Okay, the vendor has an issue, it affects my business. Okay. Specifically, there are things that you can tailor your policy to have. It's called dependent business interruption coverage. It's not always available for every carrier, but it's something that you need to think about. Just like as if the power goes out at some place that provides the power to your business with lower physical power, okay? Same situation here. Okay, you have to have a cyber standalone policy and investigate particular coverages. One important one is business interruption, because again, when you have a breach, your business is interrupted, everything is disrupted, and there's extra expenses that you incur. Okay. And that's it. Just excellent.
Thank you very much. Questions? Yeah, so questions, there's a couple of kind of questions that we have in general. If you have questions, we'll open up to you guys first, and then we've got some that we get asked on a regular basis that I'll share as well. So we'll open up the questions. I think we've got, Holly, how long do we have through here?
15 minutes.
We got about 15 minutes for questions.
And we'll stick around as long as we
Yeah.
want.
Yeah.
And then-
Yeah, we're all here till 9:30, so.
Yeah, so we're not going anywhere, so.
Well, do we want to attack the
Yeah, if
the
you want to
notification
kind
question?
of attack notification questions.
It's a really challenging environment right now for, I understand some folks can see me, right now for notification, because we have so many different laws out there. You've got California's new notification law, Illinois, Massachusetts, plus Utah's GDPR in the mix. If you have any clients at all that are European citizens, and it gets really hard. The thing you have, first thing I would suggest is work with counsel to identify the privacy and notification laws for every state in which you do business, and for the EU if you do business not just in the EU but with EU citizens. The second important thing to remember is most of these standards have fairly rapid requirements for notification. Some are extraordinarily rapid, 48 hours, 72 hours, especially if you're, say, a DoD contractor. The important thing to remember is the clock doesn't start ticking until you know you've lost data. So you know something bad happened on my network, you don't know exactly what yet, you don't have to notify anybody within 48 hours of that. Everybody understands that you can take some time to assess, try to figure out when data has been breached or stolen, and at that point do your reporting. So don't worry about reaching out to whoever right away. Collect yourself, work with a forensics firm if you have to, and get that nailed down. Before doing any reporting, talk it over with your attorneys, and make sure that before you reach out to any organizations, have your attorneys be the ones who reach out, because then any reports are covered under attorney-client privilege. So you want to have your legal team do that work, not you directly.
Yeah, and David, just to add on to that, to go to Mark's specific question around what are the laws and regulations in different states and territories, I don't think we're going to be able to answer that today, and frankly, it changes by the hour. But the general rule of thumb that I think we all need to be following is kind of something that David alluded to in his presentation around negligence. How is it negligent for one of our clients to no longer, or to rather not have multi-factor authentication? So that is an example of something that is such low cost for any business to adopt, that if they don't have it and then something happens, chances are compliance requirements are going to attack that business. And I can share stories about this. So as an example, we had a healthcare provider with over 30 locations doing about $65 million of annualized revenue. And when we approached them with something as basic as doing encryption for their end user devices, it had a one-time investment of about $8,000. One-time $8,000 on $65 million a year of a business. Unfortunately, something happened a few months later. The client rejected it on the basis that they didn't want to make the $8,000 investment. One of their providers left a laptop in the car. It was stolen. About 3 days later, there was confirmation that there was data loss, and this whole process had to begin. It cost $3.5 million to that business, plus an unknown amount to their overall reputation. So it's all kind of, what are the table stakes? How much does it cost to adopt that in the organization? And if it's reasonable given your size, it would be expected. Conversely, if we're talking about a salon in Georgetown doing $70,000 a year of revenue and needing to spend $8,000 to do the same effort, it may not be deemed a compliance requirement.
Really highlights the importance of having an incident response plan. I hear all the time from businesses, we don't really have to worry about incident response. We have cyber insurance, but you don't want to have to figure all of this out during a breach. You certainly don't want to jump the gun and start notifying customers or clients right away. You don't even understand the scope and the nature of the breach, who is affected. Certainly when you do that, it's going to create a sense of unease or panic in those customers' eyes of what's happened, where is my data. So really going through and having a plan in place that lines up the forensics, the legal, the notification procedures. Here's the process we're going to follow in the event this happens is extremely critical to have in place ahead of time so that you're prepared.
Harvey, if people are following those, does that impact the rates of the cyber insurance?
I think it can and should.
Yeah, so, great question. Cyber insurance is still, so like I said, cyber insurance is still new, okay? So, just contrast it for a second. Home insurance versus cyber insurance. Okay, home insurance at this point, literally, an underwriter can plug in a zip code, the size of your house, you know, boom, you're done, okay? And prices within 1 or 2%. Cyber insurance is, there's both an objective figure, okay, payroll, sales, the state that you're in, the type of work that you're in. But there are there are subjective standards that underwriters, I've sat in their chair, will look at, okay? And the degree to which one application comes in and it's the same size company, same revenue, same industry, and one is just doing the bare minimum, yeah, I've got some software, yeah, I sort of encrypt things, versus somebody else coming in with an incident response plan, with strategy, with those sorts of things in place that says, look, we've taken the time to put in place something, we've thought through this. There is a difference in rates that the broker can ask for based on the second one, okay? With the first one, there's no leg to stand on. It's just whatever, whatever the rates are. But yeah, there is a subjective aspect to, once you get above a minimum premium cost with cyber policy, not all prices are the same. And so your actions can affect cyber insurance.
And in fact, there have been several pretty public lawsuits over the past year where insurers have refused to pay on the policy because they felt like the client was negligent, that they didn't implement basic security. And so now you've got the clients suing their insurers for non-performance, and the insurers are saying, well, wait a second here, you left your doors unlocked, and on and on. So part of this is, one, selecting a good insurance carrier and somebody who can help you negotiate those plans. Two is reading your own policies and making sure you understand all the fine print. And three is making sure that you're doing some of this baseline stuff so that your insurance company can point to negligence and balk at paying when you really need them to.
Don't they do the auditing of your business just like they do your facilities, see if you're compliant that way? Do they not have that already in place?
No, the insurer up front, before offering the coverage and before pricing the coverage, okay, depending what the underwriting standards are, and that's the other point, your question raises a good point. There isn't a standard underwriting foundation for these policies.
There's no OSHA for them.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, the case law's not out there. They're willing to offer the client whatever they're willing to purchase. There's no separate standard. At this point, insurance requirements by client can vary very widely.
Is that coming down the pike, an OSHA type of standard?
Most of the time, you will have a questionnaire and basic, here are 20 to 50 questions of basic IT principles and practices that you'll be provided to answer. And so that certainly will impact your response to that, to your premium. But in the event there is a breach, they're certainly going to go back and look at this and say, were you truthful or not? And I think that's where you could really run into some problems of making assumptions oh, we do that, or this is fine, but you haven't actually tested that system. Could be a real problem for the organization.
Let me add on to that. So OSHA exists because there's personal safety issues, right? Okay. There's no personal safety issues with cyber insurance. There's financial safety, but it's getting to the point that the states are getting involved because they recognize that my business, if I'm negligent with it, okay, can affect the financial futures, okay, et cetera, of those people that are after it. So again, there's sort of an awareness, but there isn't the hammer as well in the sense that, yeah.
So what's the extent of that coverage? I mean, you talked before, and a lot of folks have put, their data in the cloud, their systems in the cloud, and, you think you're good, but the breach occurs in the cloud to your data. So does the insurance, does it extend that far, or does that depend on how you write it?
Well, it depends on, Microsoft and Google have their infrastructures. It's almost inconceivable that an error at Microsoft is going to cause a data loss on your part. What's most likely path here is that one of your employees is going to have compromised credentials. And that's the root. So your business is ultimately still the one who's responsible for the breach, not Microsoft. Microsoft is just providing the platform and providing basic security around the platform. And all of that would be detailed in your agreement with Salesforce or Microsoft or whoever. Sorry.
Yeah, no. Great question. So the cloud provider probably has a limitation liability clause in their agreement, right? Okay. So they're a service provider. They're a vendor. Okay. Let's say the issue, just for sake of argument, is completely their fault, not your fault, but you just happen to be there using their platform. Okay. On the limitation liability clause, you might be able to pursue whatever the amount was that they charged you for it. Okay. But beyond that, you're going to have to hire your own attorney, potentially, okay, to go after and pursue them. One of the discussions is insurance companies like to be able to subrogate, right? Okay, car insurance, classic one. They want to be able, they know that they can, any issue that they pay on a vehicle, they can go and they can cover it from somebody else, okay? Cyber insurance companies, some of the literature out there indicates that some of the cyber carriers do not want you to sign anything that limits their ability to subrogate, okay? Now, there's a difference between saying, we don't want you to do that, and saying, this is going to affect the possible coverage or void the policy. But it's something that you really need to be aware of. And that's both signing something that has a limitation liability clause with a client with respect to cyber, or with a cloud provider too as well. Okay, so again, that's a great question. And again, I would be concerned that all I would be able to recover from that cloud provider in that situation would be the amount of the services, right?
Right. So our general recommendation on all of that is going to be to make sure you treat any cloud infrastructure as you would your own on-premise infrastructure, do the appropriate backups, do the appropriate policies, because at the end of the day, in most of our cases, none of our individual businesses are going to move the needle with Microsoft to get them to agree on unlimited liability, nor will it ever make sense for us to change our course and not use that solution. So it's really kind of about what we're doing to mitigate that.
So I was just gonna ask, because almost nobody, probably unless you're an attorney, reads those agreements. And because of that, plus what Steve just said, I can't force Microsoft to remove or change that limited liability clause in Office 365, which we use. So how do you protect yourself? Is that part of the cyber insurance piece? With all your other policies that are in place?
Everything is on there.
And that's why those SOC audits are becoming so popular. Again, if your system, your network is connected to the internet, it can be hacked. It's a matter of time, resources, and focus.
Sure.
But from those vendors' perspective, they can at least provide some assurances to you that says, we've had an independent party come in and tested our system, they've tried to penetrate it. It's as secure, as reasonable, it reasonably can be. And so that's why those SOC audits are really becoming very prevalent today.
So would you then suggest you have the SOC audit prior to applying for your cybersecurity? You can get everything lined up, so you can say, here's the vendors we use, here's our policies and procedures, here's our SOC audits?
It's part of your due diligence. You should be asking that vendor, what are you doing to protect your security?
This goes to my question I was going to ask. So a third-party registration software system, cloud-based. How often do we want to ask the question about a SOC audit? Is it quarterly? Is it annually? Because obviously it's a very fluid situation with a lot of companies as far as how secure they are, sure not.
It's usually governed by a contract and how large the organization is. A lot of your data centers, for example, they'll get them on a quarterly or a semi-annual basis. Most organizations get them annually, and it covers the entire period. And then they'll issue a gap letter in between. So if you're, if it runs the calendar year and you're asking in June, they'll say, hey, here's a bridge or a gap letter that says since December 31st, we haven't had any changes to our environment or any concerns, any breaches of that nature that should give you concern that something has changed. Really, typically it's
Thank you.
And the thing to keep in mind too is, cloud service providers are a really important way to outsource your risk. Google, Microsoft, these organizations are devoting more money to cybersecurity than the GDP of a lot of nations, right? So they're going to do security better than you are, no matter how much you're spending on security yourself. So just read the agreement, understand what you're getting into, get the SOC audit data so that you can show you did your due diligence, but don't shy away from cloud providers out of fear of liability and risk. It's actually quite the contrary. As long as you're working with an organization that has its act together, your data is much safer with Google than it is in a server rack in your office in a plane.
Real quickly on you mentioned multi-factor authentication being just a super important thing. We all use that in some way, shape, or form today. Some of us use, let's say, back-end systems that are not as big as Salesforce, although we do use a product that is backbone by Salesforce. Do products like Duo that you mentioned hook up, for lack of a better way of saying it, to most software, or does your software have to have some inherent ability to accept that multi-factor authentication?
Most software nowadays has some way, there's a standard called SAML that most cloud software will have a way to access, to integrate with. If it doesn't, if it has some form of single sign-on that can integrate with your own domain or how you can log on to your computers, we can tackle multi-factor authentication that way by safeguarding your domain authentication and sort of, coming in via that side door instead. So there are systems, especially association management systems, that don't play well with multi-factor authentication. I think, Avila is one of them, for example. They don't support multi-factor authentication. Deltek, of all things, the last time I checked, didn't support multi-factor authentication in any sort of seamless way. So, there's stuff out there that doesn't work, but the software providers understand that they have to get with the program.
And high level there, the core difference is really understanding that a Microsoft or a Salesforce might have an embedded tool that you can use for potentially no cost,
right,
where a Duo or an Okta or even an RSA, which is a little old school, is designed for your IT team to be able to create those integration points for you and ideally create a single platform to use for all of your products. So in most cases, a Duo would work and allow you to tie in.
So maybe one more, time for about one more question. Okay. Well, thank you guys. Really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time this morning. Thank you guys for coming. So just give my